Admiral Threx stood on the observation deck of his flagship, staring at the blue and green sphere that floated before him. Earth, as it had been designated by his species, appeared unremarkable to him, a small, insignificant planet in the farthest reaches of the galaxy, where no true power had ever been forged. He had seen countless worlds before, and none had impressed him, yet the Council had ordered a closer inspection of this primitive planet. After a report of strange advancements in their technology, this mission, he thought, was little more than a formality, something to check off a list before his fleet could move on to more pressing matters. Humanity was a curious curiosity to him at best. Threx had heard the rumors that humans were prone to irrational behavior, that their governments were filled with instability and conflict, yet they had managed to invent things like spacecraft and communication devices faster than expected given their lack of unification across the planet. Such things intrigued him only for their ability to surprise, not for any true merit. But Threx was not one to dismiss any potential threat, no matter how small, and so here he was once again watching the distant world. The fleet had been tasked with observing Earth for several cycles now, but nothing had truly piqued Threx's interest until today, when he was invited to witness the demonstration of a human creation at the behest of one of their scientists, a human who had somehow gained access to the station located in orbit around Earth. It was an experiment and educational simulation that the humans believed would enhance their strategic prowess, an advanced training device designed to prepare pilots and commanders for space battles, a simple Starship simulator, or so they said. Threx stepped into the meeting room aboard the space station, his eyes taking in the various pieces of human technology arrayed before him. Nothing here suggested anything groundbreaking. A few machines for displaying holograms, some strange metallic devices that appeared to do nothing more than monitor signals, nothing worthy of his attention. But his curiosity remained as he was led to the simulator chamber, and inside he saw the thing that would change his perspective forever. Inside the room, a child no older than 9 or 10 sat at the controls of the Starship simulator, a young girl, her small hands confidently grasping the controls. Threx was surprised, though not at the child's presence. In fact, he thought it odd that such a young one would be given access to such an advanced system. But as the human scientist explained the situation to him, he was led to understand that it was the norm for children to interact with this simulator as a form of education and preparation for their future roles in society. A game perhaps, but one unlike any other, designed not just for entertainment, but for cognitive development. The girl glanced over at the Admiral for a brief moment, her expression curious but focused, and then turned back to her task, her eyes locking on the console in front of her as the simulation began, and the Starship appeared in a vast starry space. She manipulated the controls fluidly, and instinctively Threx leaned closer to observe, expecting some sign of clumsiness to confirm his belief that humans were far from mastering space technology. But instead something caught him off guard. The child's movements were precise, deliberate, and filled with an uncanny confidence that seemed almost unnatural. The simulation began in earnest, and Threx watched with a mix of skepticism and curiosity as the girl guided the ship through a vast field of asteroids. At first, it seemed like a simple training exercise designed to teach basic maneuvers. But as the girl's fingers moved across the console, her ship swerved effortlessly between incoming rocks, adjusting speed and direction with a fluidity that suggested she knew the space around her better than any seasoned pilot. Threx raised an eyebrow, his skepticism slowly beginning to crack. The game was no longer just about avoiding obstacles. Soon, enemy ships materialized on the screen, advanced starfighters, far beyond anything humanity had produced. Threx had to admit that the quality of the simulation was impressive, but what truly stunned him was how the girl responded. Without hesitation, she initiated a sharp turn, lining up her ship with the nearest enemy vessel. Her movements were nothing like what he expected from a child. She was calculating, precise, and utterly composed. The simulation's enemies launched their first volley, a series of laser blasts that should have destroyed the ship in an instant. But the girl's ship reacted with remarkable agility, evading the fire with a combination of defensive maneuvers that Threx could only describe as masterful. It was as if she were reading the movements of the enemies before they even made them, anticipating their every move. She didn't simply avoid the attacks. She made it look effortless. Threx's mind raced as he tried to process what he was seeing. He had studied warfare for centuries, had commanded fleets in battles that spanned entire sectors of space, and he had never seen anything quite like this. This wasn't just a game. This was something else, something more. As the simulation escalated, the enemy forces grew larger and more aggressive, launching waves of fighters and bombers. Threx expected the girl to falter, to make a mistake. After all, she was just a child. But she didn't. Instead, she analyzed the situation and deployed a series of tactical responses that took the enemy by surprise. She positioned her ship in ways that made no sense to Threx at first, offensive positions that left her vulnerable to attack. But somehow, it always paid off. She struck when it was least expected, cutting through the enemy's lines like a blade through soft flesh. Then it hit him. She wasn't just reacting to the situation. She was controlling it. Every move she made was a calculated step toward an inevitable victory. She was creating openings in the enemy's defenses that Threx, a veteran strategist, would not have predicted, let alone risk. But she wasn't risking anything. She was controlling everything. And with each passing moment, it became increasingly clear that she wasn't just playing a game. She was commanding the battlefield. Threx watched in awe as the girl's starship began to systematically dismantle the enemy forces. She launched a devastating counterattack, exploiting the weak points of the enemy ships with the kind of precision that only someone with an intimate understanding of galactic warfare could achieve. Her ship's weapons fired in perfect synchronization, obliterating one target after another. Each explosion was a calculated choice, a moment of strategic brilliance. The child, though still young, had become the commander of this simulation, and Threx felt a chill run down his spine. He had expected to see a child struggling with the complexities of a military game, but instead he was witnessing a future strategist in the making. Her grasp of tactics, her ability to think several moves ahead. It was beyond anything he could have imagined. And as the last enemy ship was reduced to debris, the simulation ended, leaving the child victorious once again. Threx stood in stunned silence, his mind racing to comprehend what he had just witnessed. The child's effortless mastery over the simulation was unlike anything he had ever seen. This was not just a game. It was a glimpse into the future of humanity, one that Threx was not prepared to face. Threx stood frozen as the simulation ended, the sound of the game's final chime ringing in the sterile silence of the room. He had watched the child, still no older than 10, take command of an entire battlefield with a level of sophistication and skill that defied explanation. The girl leaned back in her seat, unperturbed by the victory, as if this were simply another task she'd completed. Threx blinked, his mind trying to piece together what he had just witnessed. The human scientist who had been standing silently beside him now spoke, his voice breaking the silence. "Impressive, isn't it?" he asked, his tone carrying a mixture of pride and curiosity. "That's the kind of talent we're seeing more and more frequently in the younger generation. The simulator taps into a child's ability to learn through complex problem-solving, strategic thinking, and rapid adaptation. It's designed to foster that kind of innate skill." Threx's gaze remained locked on the girl. She had just defeated an enemy fleet using tactics that would have taken any military strategist decades to master. How could a child, no matter how advanced the technology, be capable of such insight? Threx's mind raced, his internal systems processing what he had seen and calculating probabilities, trying to fit the child's performance into any framework he could understand. Yet it didn't make sense. There was something about the way she played that was different. The scientist continued, oblivious to Threx's growing discomfort. The simulator doesn't just teach basic techniques. It enhances a child's natural cognitive abilities, allowing them to access a vast database of military strategies from human history, as well as from other species. The system was designed with deep learning algorithms that adjust to the player's actions, challenging them at every step, introducing real-time scenarios based on historical battles, and pushing them to their limits. A shiver ran down Threx's spine. The child was not just playing a game. She wasn't even learning. She was adapting. The more he thought about it, the more he realized that this simulator was not a simple training tool. It was an immersive system capable of accelerating a human's mental and strategic growth, tapping into an intelligence far beyond what Threx had anticipated from a species he once deemed primitive. The scientist must have noticed Threx's stunned expression because he smiled. "I see it now. You're wondering how a child could possibly possess such skills. Well, the human mind is more adaptable than you might think. This simulation doesn't just teach how to think. It trains the mind to think in ways that seem impossible. It allows young players to develop new strategies, innovate in real time. The result? You get children who can think like battle-hardened commanders before they're even teenagers." Threx's mind was reeling. He had assumed that humanity's greatest strength lay in their technological advancements. Their ships, their weapons, their machines. But this was something else entirely. These humans were not just relying on their tools. They were using their minds in ways that surpassed even the most sophisticated artificial intelligence. The adaptability, the unpredictability. It was unlike anything he had ever encountered. It was like watching the birth of a new kind of warfare, one that didn't follow the old rules. "Do you know," the scientist continued, "some of these children have outperformed seasoned military officers after only a few weeks of training. The implications are staggering. Humanity's entire approach to warfare might be changing." He gave a small chuckle, but it didn't reach his eyes. "And I suspect that's why you're here, Admiral. To understand what you've just witnessed." Threx turned his gaze away from the scientist, focusing once again on the child, who was now standing up and walking away from the console, her expression one of quiet satisfaction. He had underestimated humanity in the most fundamental way. He had thought them simple, easy to overlook. But now, in the wake of this demonstration, he saw them as something far more dangerous, something with the potential to change the balance of power in the galaxy. Threx had spent centuries commanding armies, outsmarting adversaries, and conquering worlds. He had seen countless species rise and fall. But never before had he encountered an opponent like this. It wasn't their technology that made them formidable. It was their minds. And that realization sent a deep, unsettling thought through Threx's mind. If humanity could harness this potential, if they could breed commanders and strategists from such a young age, they might soon become a force that no empire, not even his, could ignore. A new understanding began to dawn on Threx. The universe was not ready for what humanity was about to become, and he wasn't sure whether he should fear it or respect it. Threx's mind buzzed with a combination of unease and curiosity as he watched the young girl leave the simulator, her small feet tapping softly on the floor. The scientist, sensing Threx's confusion, gestured toward a nearby console and said, "Would you like to see more? We've got hundreds of simulations stored in the system, and we can demonstrate how the children learn to apply advanced tactics in real time." For a moment, Threx considered refusing. He had already seen enough to understand that humanity was far more dangerous than he had imagined, but the nagging feeling in the pit of his stomach, an unsettling mix of respect and fear, compelled him to stay. He needed to understand how something so seemingly innocent could become such a formidable weapon. "I would like to see more," Threx said, his voice low, his eyes still fixed on the door through which the child had disappeared. The scientist quickly entered a series of commands on the console, and another simulation began. This time, the enemy ships were far more advanced, their weapons capable of overwhelming any standard human craft. The scenario was set to a galactic battle, one in which the odds were severely stacked against the human player. The ship's cockpit appeared once again, but this time it was occupied by a different child. This one even younger than the girl before, perhaps 6 or 7 years old. Frex couldn't help but feel a flicker of doubt. This child, barely old enough to be considered an adolescent, was about to face an enemy fleet that could obliterate entire star systems. But as the simulation began, the young child gripped the controls, the same innate confidence Frex had seen in the previous player shining through. There was no hesitation. The child's ship immediately dove into the fray, dodging incoming fire with precision that would have impressed even seasoned warriors. Frex watched in disbelief as the child calmly adjusted the ship's course, weaving through an onslaught of missiles and laser blasts. This was no mere game. It was a battlefield, and the child was moving through it like a veteran. As the simulation progressed, Frex noticed something startling. While the younger child's maneuvers weren't as sophisticated as the older girl's, there was a fundamental understanding of the principles of space warfare. The child would never have had the opportunity to learn this on their own, not at such a young age. And yet, they were using tactics far beyond what any standard military academy would teach a recruit. The child didn't just react. They anticipated the enemy's next move before it happened. Frex watched as the small ship appeared to almost dance through enemy fire, narrowly missing attacks with a precision that left him speechless. The younger child's instinctive ability to make decisions based on pattern recognition was something Frex had seen in only the most brilliant of commanders. But this child was learning it faster than anyone should be able to. It wasn't just the simulator's design that was amazing. It was how quickly and effortlessly the child adapted to every new challenge thrown their way. Frex had seen countless warriors and tacticians, but this was something else. A new kind of fighter, one who could thrive in chaos and turn even the most dangerous situation to their advantage. "You see," the scientist said quietly, breaking Frex's concentration. "It's not just about mimicking past strategies. The children create new tactics as they go. It's their minds. They're capable of abstract thinking at a level we never thought possible for such young ones. This simulator doesn't just teach them how to respond to an opponent's moves. It teaches them how to outthink and outmaneuver an opponent at the highest levels." Frex absorbed the words, but his mind was still processing what he had witnessed. He had always thought of warfare as something that could be planned, calculated, and executed with perfect precision. But this was a new kind of combat. A war fought not just with weapons, but with the mind. Humanity wasn't relying on brute strength or advanced technology alone. They were relying on something far more dangerous: the unpredictable, ever-evolving nature of the human brain. The simulation ended, and the child's victory was just as undeniable as the girl's. Frex could hardly believe what he had seen. These children, these seemingly fragile, unassuming beings, had the potential to reshape the galaxy. In a few short years, they would be ready for combat on a level that many of the most advanced species in the galaxy would struggle to comprehend. It was as if humanity had found a way to forge a new breed of warrior, one that didn't follow the rules, didn't adhere to any preconceived limits. The sheer adaptability, the capacity for rapid growth, was unlike anything Frex had encountered. A realization settled in his chest, cold and sharp. Humanity wasn't just capable of changing the course of a battle. They were poised to change the course of an entire war. And this simulation was only the beginning. What other secrets did Earth's children hold? What could they achieve once they were fully grown? Frex looked at the console, his mind beginning to form a new respect for the species. He was beginning to understand just how wrong he had been to dismiss them so easily. If Earth's children could become this dangerous by simply playing a game, what would happen once they truly understood the weight of what they were capable of? He was starting to fear the answer. Frex couldn't shake the nagging feeling that he had only scratched the surface of what humanity was capable of. His mind replayed the simulations he had just witnessed, the ease with which the children navigated the most complex battle scenarios, the way their instincts led them to outthink their enemies. It was as if they were born to command. He had seen commanders and tacticians rise through the ranks of countless civilizations, but none had displayed the raw potential that these humans exhibited. The scientist continued to watch Threx, clearly pleased with the impact the simulations had made. "It's incredible, isn't it?" the human said, his voice filled with quiet awe. "These children are not just playing games, they are learning to think like warriors. The system has been integrated with deep learning algorithms, and it's designed to test their mental limits. In just a few weeks of consistent use, children can adapt to new combat scenarios and create novel tactics that many seasoned veterans would never consider." Threx shook his head slightly, trying to wrap his mind around the implications. This wasn't just a breakthrough in training technology. This was an evolution in how warfare could be waged. If humans could learn to think so fluidly, so dynamically, it was only a matter of time before they could apply this understanding to the real world, perhaps in ways that the galaxy had never seen. "Tell me more," Threx demanded, his voice low, almost as if he feared the answer. "What exactly happens when these children continue this process, when they grow older?" The scientist smiled, but there was an edge to his expression, as if he were about to share something that might unsettle Threx even further. "The children progress at an exponential rate. The system not only helps them learn from historical battles, but also adapts to the user's specific style. It learns from their choices, offering new challenges, introducing more advanced opponents. By the time they reach adulthood, many of these children are already capable of leading complex military operations, and that's where the real power lies." Threx's brow furrowed as he tried to digest this new information. What the scientist was describing was not just an accelerated learning process. It was an entire mindset being instilled in them. The children were not merely learning to respond to threats. They were being taught how to create them, to think critically, to anticipate and outsmart their opponents. "And you allow this?" Threx couldn't keep the disbelief from his voice. "You allow these children to grow into commanders capable of overthrowing entire fleets. These are your children, your future soldiers." The scientist's gaze turned serious, and for the first time, Threx saw something close to concern in his eyes. "It's not about creating soldiers, Admiral," the scientist replied quietly. "It's about creating thinkers, problem solvers, innovators. The world, the galaxy, is changing. In the past, wars were fought with brute strength and overwhelming firepower. But the future of conflict will rely on adaptability, creativity, and mental agility. These children, they'll be the ones leading humanity's future in space." Threx took a step back, his mind racing. He had underestimated humanity's potential in ways he hadn't even begun to understand. The more he heard, the more it became clear that the human race was advancing at a pace that he couldn't fathom. These children, this generation, were going to be something entirely different. They would rise not as warriors in the traditional sense, but as master tacticians, capable of altering the course of entire wars with a single well-thought-out move. They had the potential to change the very fabric of how warfare was fought, a kind of cerebral combat that had never existed before. The thought of it sent a chill through Threx's bones. He had always prided himself on his ability to outthink his enemies, to foresee their every move. But now he realized humanity might soon be capable of doing the same, or worse, doing it in ways that no one could predict. As if reading his thoughts, the scientist leaned in slightly, his voice growing quieter. "Admiral, humanity isn't just learning to defend themselves anymore. They're learning to outsmart their enemies before the battle even begins. You saw it in the simulations. These children are already capable of things that your most seasoned commanders would struggle to match. They've barely scratched the surface of their potential, but in just a few short decades, they'll be capable of commanding fleets, navigating diplomacy, and leading entire civilizations." Threx swallowed hard. The implications of what he had just heard were staggering. Humanity had always been unpredictable, yes, but now, with this unprecedented ability to learn, to adapt, they could become a force that could rewrite the balance of power in the galaxy. They weren't just catching up to other species, they were on the verge of surpassing them. I came here thinking Earth was no threat, Threx muttered, almost to himself. But now, I'm not so sure. The scientist's smile was slow but knowing. That's the point, Admiral. Earth was never meant to be a threat. But the human mind, when given the right tools, has the potential to change the game entirely. And you've just seen the beginning. Threx stood still, his thoughts tumbling in every direction. The weight of the scientist's words lingered in the air like an oppressive fog. Earth wasn't a threat. Not yet. But it would be, and perhaps sooner than anyone anticipated. What struck Threx most profoundly was the realization that humanity had the potential to outthink any of the galaxy's great empires, a force of minds rather than armies. He turned his attention back to the child who had first impressed him. She was now standing by a window, looking out into the vast expanse of space, her small hands pressed against the cool glass. She appeared so ordinary, so human. Yet Threx couldn't shake the image of her effortlessly commanding a virtual fleet. There was something profound about how a species so young, so seemingly unremarkable, could rise to this level of ingenuity and adaptability. What happens when these children grow older? Threx asked, his voice steady but edged with an underlying sense of urgency. What then? The scientist exhaled, as if preparing for a moment of truth. By the time they reach their early 20s, many of them are already commanding simulated fleets in real-world scenarios. But it doesn't end there. They're integrated into human military training programs, embedded with strategic thinking and leadership skills. And some are even deployed in high-stakes missions as part of a new experimental program we're calling Mind Commanders. It's an initiative to pair young minds like these with advanced ships and military systems. Threx felt a wave of disbelief crash over him. So you've been preparing them for actual war? The scientist looked uncomfortable, though his words didn't falter. Humanity has always had to fight for its survival. We've had our fair share of conflict and danger, but the galaxy is growing more volatile by the day. We can't afford to wait until they're older. We've been giving them the tools they need to think strategically, to survive, and eventually to lead. Our hope is to prepare the next generation of leaders before they face the challenges of interstellar conflict. Threx processed the scientist's words. Humanity wasn't simply creating soldiers, they were building something far more powerful, minds that could anticipate, outsmart, and overcome the galaxy's deadliest threats. What was being born here, on this seemingly insignificant world, was a new kind of warfare. One that relied on mental acuity over brute strength, where battles were won before a single shot was fired. It was a terrifying concept. Suddenly, Threx had a vision, a future where human children, not yet fully grown, led fleets into battle, outwitting the greatest tacticians and military minds of entire star systems. They wouldn't need massive armies or overwhelming firepower. They would need only their minds, sharpened, honed, and perfectly prepared for combat. Tell me more about these Mind Commanders, Threx demanded, the urgency in his voice growing. How are they trained, and how do they interact with your military forces? The scientist paused, clearly measuring his words. It's a highly selective program. Not every child qualifies. Only those with the highest cognitive abilities and a natural aptitude for leadership are chosen. They undergo an accelerated learning process designed to integrate them with advanced war strategies. They're trained to make real-time decisions, calculate the best courses of action in the heat of battle, and adapt quickly. They may start small, helping to plan military operations or command smaller units, but over time, their roles expand. Some eventually command entire fleets. Threx's stomach tightened. The idea of children commanding fleets was nearly unthinkable to him. How could they possibly have the maturity and experience to lead soldiers in battle? Yet, the simulations had shown him the truth. These children were already operating at a level that far surpassed the expectations of even the most advanced species. The ability to think several steps ahead, to anticipate and outmaneuver, wasn't just a fluke. It was inherent in the way their minds worked. He turned his gaze back to the child at the window, her face serene but focused, as though the vastness of space and the weight of responsibility hadn't yet touched her. In that moment, Threx felt a deep sense of foreboding. It wasn't just that humanity had the potential to become a force, it was that they were becoming something new, something that would render the old ways of war obsolete. The galaxy won't be prepared for this, Threx muttered to himself. The scientist didn't respond immediately, but when he did, there was a note of quiet pride in his voice. No, the galaxy won't be prepared for them. A shiver crawled up Threx's spine. It was as if the universe were shifting under his feet, and he was no longer sure where his footing lay. Humanity's true power wasn't in their technology, their weapons, or their fleets. It was in their minds. And as the children grew, as their intellects evolved and merged with the vast resources of their society, humanity would be ready for anything. As he stood there, staring at the child who had unwittingly shown him what was to come, Threx realized that the galaxy was on the verge of something far more dangerous than war. It was the dawn of a new era, one where minds, not armies, would decide the fate of civilizations. And humanity, for all its youth, would lead the way. Threx stood there, feeling the weight of the moment press down on him. The child at the window seemed so small, so fragile in the grand scheme of things, but Threx now knew the truth. She wasn't just a child. She was a future commander, and soon there would be many more like her. Humanity wasn't just advancing. They were evolving into something that could shape the future of the galaxy, and not in a way that could be easily ignored or dismissed. The scientist, noticing Threx's contemplative silence, spoke again, breaking the heavy atmosphere in the room. The thing is, Admiral, it's not just the children who benefit from this program. It's the entire human race. These mind commanders will be the ones who redefine our strategies in war, but more importantly, they'll be the ones who broker peace. Their ability to outthink and outmaneuver is not just a military asset. It's a diplomatic one as well. Threx's eyes narrowed. Diplomacy, he repeated, incredulous. You're suggesting that children who can outsmart the best military commanders in the galaxy could also reshape the way entire civilizations interact. The scientist gave a small nod. That's exactly what I'm saying. Their ability to predict, to understand not just tactics, but also the psychology of conflict, is a game changer. These children don't just learn how to fight. They learn how to communicate, how to negotiate under pressure. They learn how to read situations, understand motives, and position themselves accordingly. That's why we call them mind commanders. They're more than just warriors. They're future leaders of humanity. And one day, they may be the ones that prevent wars from ever starting. Threx struggled to wrap his mind around the enormity of what he was hearing. He had come here to study human warfare, to understand their growing potential as a threat to the established powers in the galaxy. What he was discovering, however, was far more unsettling. This wasn't about one day becoming a threat. It was about humanity's long-term vision for a new kind of future, one where their children could step into roles that even the oldest and most experienced species couldn't fathom. The galaxy is built on power, Threx said slowly, his tone heavy with doubt. For centuries, civilizations have fought and struggled for control. What you're describing sounds like a dream of diplomacy and peace. How can you expect the galaxy to embrace this vision when so many others only understand the language of conflict? The scientist smiled faintly, a trace of melancholy in his eyes. I don't expect the galaxy to embrace it right away. You're right. Power is the language that most understand. But we're changing the rules, Admiral. And once these children grow, once they come into their own, they'll be the ones rewriting the entire playbook. The rest of the galaxy won't have a choice but to learn how to engage with humanity on these terms, whether they like it or not. Threx's chest tightened as the full scope of what humanity was becoming settled in his mind. The more he thought about it, the more he realized that they weren't just preparing to face the galaxy's threats. They were preparing to reshape the entire framework of galactic politics. They were going to be the ones who decided how wars were fought and perhaps how they were avoided altogether. In the face of all this, Threx felt an unsettling mix of awe and fear. The humans weren't just evolving. They were outgrowing the very systems that had governed galactic power for eons. They weren't simply advancing technologically or militarily. They were evolving into a new kind of power altogether, one that operated on a higher plane of thought, where strategy and foresight trumped brute strength and sheer numbers. Threx turned toward the window, his eyes focusing on the stars. The universe felt suddenly smaller and more fragile. He had always believed that the balance of power in the galaxy was fixed, that the larger and older civilizations would dictate the course of history. But now, in the face of humanity's mind-bending potential, he understood how quickly that balance could shift. One day soon, humanity would no longer be a force to be feared. They would be a force that defined the future. The scientist's voice broke his reverie. "I think you understand now, Admiral. Humanity is just beginning to show its true potential, and when the time comes, they will lead, not with force of arms, but with the force of their minds." Threx's voice was low but firm as he responded, "And what if the galaxy isn't ready for this kind of change?" The scientist's eyes met Threx's, and for the first time, Threx saw something other than pride. There was a deep, unspoken understanding between them, an acknowledgement that no one, not even humanity, could predict how the galaxy would react. "I suppose," the scientist said slowly, "we'll all find out together." The silence that followed was heavy, thick with the weight of what had just been shared. Threx turned his gaze back to the child at the window, watching her as if she were a harbinger of a new era. She didn't look like a weapon or a commander in the making. She looked like any other child, full of innocent wonder and unspoken potential. And yet, in that moment, Threx realized that humanity's true strength lay not in their outward appearances, but in their minds, their ability to learn, adapt, and innovate in ways that no other species had ever managed. The scientist's voice broke through the reverie once more, calm but resolute. "You've seen what they can do, Admiral. But the real question now is, how will the rest of the galaxy respond when these children grow up and begin to challenge the old power structures?" Threx frowned, his mind still racing. "You've given them the tools to reshape the future, but tools alone don't change the galaxy. The established powers will resist. They'll see humanity as a threat, as something too unpredictable to be trusted." "True," the scientist conceded, nodding slightly. "But that's why we're not just preparing the children. We're preparing humanity as a whole. We're instilling a new kind of thinking, a way of being that values innovation over domination. The future won't be won by the strongest fleet or the most powerful weapon. It will be decided by those who can outthink their opponents, who can adapt to changing circumstances and forge new paths. And humanity has already proven they can do this better than anyone else." Threx's mind churned with the possibilities, and he began to see the broader picture. The galaxy, as it stood now, was governed by the old rules. Might makes right, dominance through military strength, and alliances built on fear or force. But humanity was preparing to write a new set of rules. The galaxy had always been a battlefield for the strong, but soon it might be one where the cleverness of a single mind could decide the fate of entire civilizations. "What happens if those in power resist this change?" Threx asked, his voice taking on a more serious tone. "What happens when the established empires see humanity as a threat, as something that can't be controlled or predicted?" The scientist's expression darkened, his eyes filled with a knowing understanding. "There will be resistance. Of course there will be. There always is when something new emerges. The old powers won't want to give up their control easily. They'll see humanity's potential and feel threatened, just as you do right now. But what they won't understand is that humanity's power isn't in numbers or firepower. It's in their ability to think, to evolve, and to adapt."